So we may be going live on YouTube right now, and so if we are, for all of my watching and listening audience, it's good to see you. But I'm waiting for the official thumbs up okay
We got it.
from
We're
from
good. We're
YouTube,
good.
and so I do appreciate it. Mitch, welcome to the conversation. This is Conversations with Mitch Gray, and of course, I'm your host, Dr. Keith McNally. Mitch, it's always good to see you. How are you doing today?
Doing okay. Doing okay. Good to see you, Keith.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
So you've had previous experience going through therapeutic processes, and
Mhm.
actually you mentioned in the previous conversation, you took a month, literally 30 days. I think it was last year. You took a sabbatical and you kind of, went into a retreat or whatever that is. I'm going to be at a loss for words, and please forgive me. To kind of restructure some things in your life. And so last week, we identified the fact that I'm kind of stepping into my own therapeutic process because I need to deal with the trauma of having been a Marine and served in certain situations and having to really deal with it now. Because at this point, after 5 suicide attempts since 1996 and suicide ideation kind of resurfacing itself again, I thought it was important for me to kind of step in and be responsible and take accountability for myself for my own well-being. And so if I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of others. And I do have a 14-year-old daughter who needs me. So I thought if we could, Mitch, today, can we address accountability and responsibility in terms of our own work
Let's do
throughout the
it.
therapeutic process?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do it. I like it.
Okay. So how does one actually get started? Because I am have, a couple sessions in now, and I'm I'm always on the I don't know what to expect. We step
Mhm.
into that therapeutic session and I don't know what to expect. Some of it is anxiety. I kind of think about, well, are we going to resurface this issue or having to deal with this? How much vulnerability do I need to present? Mitch, how does that work? Because I'm new at this. I'm usually on the other side of the microphone asking the questions, and now I've got to answer the questions in session. How's it work?
Yeah. It's always interesting, right? Because the monkey mind takes us to places that don't usually come to fruition. In fact, to be totally vulnerable, we talked about vulnerability last week. I was just having a conversation with myself this morning because last night was a really hard night for me because the monkey mind was just taking me everywhere. I got very little sleep, et cetera, et cetera. And so this morning, the conversation I was having with myself and the question I asked myself was, how often is my mind usually right about scenarios? And the answer is really never. The scenarios that we play out in our mind never work out. In fact, most of the time, the scenario that usually manifests is better than the scenario that we've created in our mind before the moment ever happens. Because we tend to go into protective mode. We tend to go into fight or flight mode when thoughts overtake us. And what fight or flight mode lends to us, by the way, that serves us well when needed, is it lends to us the idea that we have to run or we have to fight because the worst case scenario is happening. What we usually don't do. So in the wild, if you watch a rabbit will stop every few seconds and shake their body. And most animals do that same thing. You just often see it with smaller animals more as an example than larger animals, because we usually don't see larger animals when we're just out and about. But the animals will stop every few seconds and shake their body. What they're actually doing is shaking their nervous system from the fight or flight that they just went through because they're always on edge looking for danger. So, what's happening when our monkey mind takes us through all these scenarios? How vulnerable should I be? What should I protect myself from? What's happening is we're shifting our brain into fight or flight mode. So, we're creating the worst case scenario possible so that we can be prepared for it. The problem is 90% of us, especially in modern settlements, North America, et cetera, on and on, we don't live in fight or flight. And so we never shake ourselves of fight or flight. So we're also creating these figments of our imagination that lend our body and our mind to fight or flight. So for you, it was, how vulnerable should I be? What should I do in this circumstance, et cetera, et cetera. Those are really challenging situations because we find ourselves in our monkey mind constantly creating scenarios that are never going to come to fruition, but we also never shake it off like the little rabbit. In fact, you just told the audience last June, I was spent 30 days in a full immersion rehab center, a healing center for my mental health. And one thing that we did in one of the therapy sessions as a group is we would literally, for like 30 minutes, just shake physically.
Wow.
Because what they were teaching us was that we need to do that. And there's science that proves this, that if you physically shake and you physically move like your animalistic behavior tells you to, it actually recalibrates your nervous system out of fight or flight. But we never take time to do that. So let's just play this out in a scenario. I'm headed into a meeting because my boss just said, "Hey, Mitch, I need to see you." Which, by the way, I teach leaders. That's the worst thing you can say because it's not very helpful. Because then what happens in our mind? Oh my gosh, why did they need to see me? What did I do wrong? Am I going to get fired? Did the project not go like it should? So we create all these scenarios. We go into the meeting. The meeting turns out better than we figured it would because that's what usually happens. What we don't do after the meeting is shake off the fight or flight that we had put ourselves into. So what does that do? That banks stress,
Mhm.
and it banks the trauma inside of our nervous system so that we never let go of it and relinquish it. There was a therapist at the healing center that I was at that when she walked across campus, she would actually run or skip. And she was a movement therapist. And so she fully believed that movement and play is part of what we're missing as adults, especially in our society. Again, there's science behind it. We don't play. We don't get those agitations out through play and through having fun and through creativity. And so when you talk about how do we start, it really does begin starting with A, doing what we can to shift the conversation mentally. So, like I did this morning, okay, Mitch, you know that these scenarios don't usually come true. When you make up your mind about something, it usually works out for you. There are good things happening for you. So that's the starting point, is shifting the conversation. But the second part of that is really shaking off, like the little rabbit does, those moments that bring us stress so that we can recalibrate our nervous system and our fight or flight mode into a peaceful, calming presence where we can just, like the little bunny, enjoy the carrot that's being given to us or the grass that we're eating or whatever. But it really does. And the science behind all of this is really incredible about our brain activity when we're in fight or flight mode or never in fight or flight mode, or we don't ever shake off that survival fight or flight mode. And so it just becomes trauma built up as stress inside of us. And so to me, those two things, reshaping the scenario. My boss called me in. It's not going to be bad. It's going to be great. Something good is going to happen, even if it is challenging. We're going to get through it. Look at past history that shows us our boss doesn't fire people or whatever, or if you're in a terrible job and they do. So maybe your fight or flight mode in that moment is reasonable. It serves you well until it doesn't. But then after that moment, really shaking it off, whether it's through a breathing exercise or physical movement, or whatever that looks like. And for, you were talking about your therapy sessions. Those are moments after your therapy session to shake it off because those are very vulnerable, difficult challenges. And you're being asked, all of us are, to revisit moments that caused us pain and agony. Our body shifts into fight or flight. But how often do we shake it off? Like there's literal science behind it. And so those are some exercises that we can begin with that will begin reshaping the conversations that we're having internally first and then externally as well.
as you were, you know, giving us an opportunity to think about the situations and circumstances in our life, I am by trade, so I'm a college professor by trade, and I've had to step into many a classroom. Now, there's a difference between grade school classroom teaching and college classroom teaching.
Yeah.
You actually go to school to be a PK, preschool to 12 I'm sorry, PK to 12. You actually go to school, you get a college degree to actually learn
Oh
to
yeah.
teach. It's a skill, not a very high paying skill, but it should be more. Anyway, you don't get paid. I mean, you don't go to school to go be a college professor.
Right.
And I say that to say, you talk about, your boss calls you in to a meeting. No, no open, no, one paragraph, full
Right.
disclosure. This is what we're going to talk about.
Just
Hey,
I need to see you.
I
Yeah.
need to see you.
Yeah.
Every time I step into, that college classroom, that classroom experience, and I'm still a trainer for another company, I still have those. It may not be flight or fight, whatever you're saying. It may not be that epitome of this is going to be the worst situation I'm going to experience, but there's
Right.
still a level of fear,
Hmm.
anxiety, uncertainty, because the mind says you may forget something.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I teach technology. The technology may not work.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to ask you a question that you don't know the answer to. All these negative things. And I am totally building up that anxiety. And even I have different podcasts. We're doing this thing, and I've had other podcasts, The Question Guy, Coach's Corner. Um, the technology may not work. My internet
Hmm.
may drop. All these
Hmm.
possible things can go wrong.
Sure.
And I've had to training how I think about the experience. And so my therapist is teaching me, and I have found out through conversations with other people how to kind of look into that situation and give it some free thoughts, maybe, or we'd like to use the word manifestation. How would you
Hmm.
manifest that? And I'm on the fence with the word manifestation. It's used, it's overused, it's used for different things. But if there's a way of stepping in to a situation prior to actually being in that situation
Right.
and framing it in a way through your thoughts that it's going to be a good experience.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's going to be a productive experience. It's going to be a valuable experience. She taught me to do that because this past Saturday, I was going to have a conversation that was going to bring up some traumatic memories.
Yeah.
And she said I could do it first person. I could actually think about the conversation and how I'm going to feel, think, and do regarding the conversation before it actually happens, or like a fly on the wall. Look at the conversation I'm going to have as a third person. Same thing, but maybe that's a more comfortable space. You're not going to be first person. You're going to see it from somebody else's perspective.
Right.
Mitch, I got to ask you, is there, are there ways, or have you learned to kind of step into that future space to kind of create that space the way you would like it to be so that you don't have to react in flight or fight
Right.
responses?
Yeah. Well, first of all, anxiety and nervousness is okay. In fact, I would say that it's good because it makes you feel alive. And I would say, secondly, no matter how much repetition you have, you're almost always going to have some form of anxiety when you're doing something that's really important. And so that does show you the importance of it. Now, to that point, you hit the nail on the head when you use the phrase a valuable experience rather than a good experience. Here's what I mean by that. If we can do all we can to not judge the moment, whether good or bad, but rather see the moment as valuable, that shifts our perspective. It doesn't remove the anxiety, and I hope it never does, because again, anxiety is telling you that you're alive. It's telling you that you're feeling. It's connecting your thoughts, your brain patterns, your nervous system, your body, your skin feeling like it's crawling when you get anxious, when you get nervous. You can feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I mean, those types of things are actually really, really valuable because it's letting you know that in that moment you're connected. So then it's the idea of removing the judgment. Is this going to be a good or bad moment? Well, the fact is, it's just going to be a moment. And really, because it's the whole idea, well, I got fired from my job, so it was a bad moment, unless it leads you to the opportunity of a lifetime. So that might have been a difficult moment, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad moment, because without that moment of difficulty, you may not have had the passageway to the opportunity of a lifetime. Or maybe that job has been stressing you out, or maybe this new client. I have a new client meeting this afternoon, literally this afternoon, the day we're recording this. A client that reached out to me. I don't know anything about them. We're going to have a meeting. It's a pretty large entity. Yeah, I have some anxiety and nervousness. Who wouldn't? Because it's fun, it's exciting, like it's unknown. I may or may not sign this client. Who knows? I hope I do. It would be great. But maybe it's just an opportunity again to practice. Maybe it's meeting someone who knows someone else. Maybe it is an opportunity that manifests into revenue and resources. I don't know. So the idea of accepting that is really what calms the anxiety. I'm not terribly nervous about it because I've done this 1,000 times. Like I've been in this moment before, either in my mind or physically and literally. But I've been in this moment 1,000 times. It's no big deal. It's just another moment. Now, I say that like it's easy, because if we're going through really difficult circumstances and if decisions have been made for us and we feel like we didn't have a say in the matter, which often happens in life, we then view those moments as bad. The best thing we can do, and you kind of started the conversation with this when you were talking about going into therapy, how vulnerable should I be? The answer is yes. You should be as vulnerable as vulnerability needs. And I say that to say we should experience the moment for the moment and feel all of the emotions and feel all of the feelings and think all of the thoughts, because it is going through that experience, even if the moment seems negative or harmful, and it could be harmful. And if it is, I'm sorry, get out of that moment as fast as possible. But at the same time, you see these wondrous stories of people that go through life changing circumstances and they turn it into momentum for living a life they never thought they would live. And you see this with people that have car accidents or freak accidents or disease, driven situations where you have 2 years to live life or whatever it is. So we all go through these circumstances, but it's really about not attaching to the judgment. Is it good, bad? But instead just accepting it's a moment. I can deal with that, and allowing that to open our vulnerability and our alignment to deciding what we're going to do with that moment. Because in the end, we all do get to choose. We get to choose how we respond to the moment. And we get to choose if that moment comes out as negative or positive. No matter what the experience was, we truly get to choose.
Now, we've been having conversations, I guess, easily for 3 years now in that time span. And you have consistently, and maybe more so recently, but rather consistently, have been careful when you talk about things good, bad.
Mhm.
Um, Poor choice of words if we see things as good or bad, especially in terms of circumstances. And our original conversation was that of leadership. Leadership is neutral, it's
Yeah.
neither good nor bad. There may be good or bad results of a decision made, but
Yes.
leadership in itself is neither good nor bad. It's a neutral idea. And you've revisited that idea right here. A situation is neither good nor bad. and going into the situation, if we can kind of remove that stigma of this is going to be really good or this is going to be really bad, how, because I want to kind of, looking at the time, end this conversation with a reframe in terms of our thinking.
Yeah.
How do we think about situations if we're not thinking about them as good, bad, bipolar?
Right. Right. They may be hard. So we're not removing the difficulty. I like to use exercising and lifting weights as an example. So when you lift weights and you put resistance on your muscles, if you do it time over time, what you're actually doing is tearing down muscle fiber, letting it heal and rebuilding it. So if someone could say, well, I tore my muscle, what do we automatically think? Oh, that's bad. That's harmful. But that's really what you're doing. You're lifting weights. You're tearing muscle fiber, letting it heal, and then rebuilding it so that you have muscle fiber on muscle fiber. And that's actually how you gain strength and you gain resistance and you gain fiber that can really build and be substantial. Whereas if you look at someone who doesn't work out, they don't provide resistance to their muscle mass. What happens to their muscle over time? It deteriorates. And so it's interesting how we can actually look at these things and go, oh, that's actually interesting. It's beneficial to tear down my muscle fiber so that I can rebuild it. We're putting our muscle into a tense situation. It doesn't mean that it's not difficult or hard when we remove good or bad. It doesn't mean that life sometimes just plain sucks because it does. And it doesn't mean that dark moments aren't going to still gather in the clouds and form over our heads. What it means is I get to choose my perspective. And sometimes that looks like it's a very dark moment, and my perspective is I'm just here to survive, fight or flight. Or it could mean, oh, that moment I was just there to survive. Here's what I learned in that moment. Oh, now it's a beneficial moment because I learned a lesson. Oh, now I can apply that lesson better in the future so that I may not find myself in that circumstance again. Or if I do find myself in that circumstance again, I know how to respond in a different way than I did before. And it's that joke that you and I tell quite often. I think the universe has this way of bringing us back to the same moment in time until we really learn the lesson that we're meant to learn. And so it's not that it removes the difficulty. I don't want people to hear that because life can be really, really difficult. Even for the monkest of monks who lives on a Tibetan mountain and doesn't deal with anybody but just meditates all day. Guess what? They still deal with difficult moments because that's the human mind. So I think it's really about learning to recalibrate both our thoughts, our mind, our emotions, and our body to where we can go, okay, I'm not going to view this as good or bad. It may hurt and it may be damaging at that moment in time, but rather I'm going to look at it as a building opportunity to move forward so that when I face this scenario again, I'm much more equipped to deal with it in a way that's healthy and that's beneficial to not only me, but to maybe those around me as well.
Then let's take today and this week and recalibrate.
Yeah,
And so, Mitch, when I see you next time, let's talk recalibration
let's
and
do
get
it.
that together. I
Love it.
appreciate your time as always. For those of you who have been watching and listening, we will see you next time.